Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another New Jersey Constitutional Republicans virtual conversation. It's once again my great pleasure to have our good friend, Mr. William Federer, Bill Federer, here tonight with us again. Bill, thank you for joining me.
JR, great to be with you.
Tonight's topic, very interesting, appropriate for the month of February. We will be discussing Lincoln and Darwin, Abraham Lincoln and Charles Darwin, who were born, Bill, on the exact same day in 1809, February the 12th, and we're going to discuss the resulting legacies of both men, which are very, very different. But before we do that, Bill, I want to share with the audience so that they can take note of your website, and you will find this presentation that we're going to be talking about tonight on theamericanminute.com. That's theamericanminute.com. I'll provide a link to that. And this has each day, Bill has an American minute that he gives, and all sorts of great history every single day. You're going to want to subscribe to it, get it delivered in your email each day. I do. Often you'll see me post on New Jersey Constitutional Republicans group page, the American Minute for that day. So I highly recommend you go to americanminute.com and ask for the American Minute to be delivered to your mailbox. And of course, all the books that Bill has written, he's written many, many books, different tabs on here, all the products. He has DVDs, ebooks on here. And Bill is continually writing, continually going throughout the country to discuss all these very important topics. And of course, he brings a very important Christian and conservative perspective to the work that he does. And I also want to show, before we get started with Bill, he has an excellent program. Bill, I think I've got about 1,000 of these faith and history programs recorded on my DVR, and I want to share with the people here. This is a TCT channel, and you can go to watch.tct.tv/faith in history, and I'll provide the link again at the end of the program today. But you're going to want to look at, you're going to want to view and watch these videos. I mean, you're going to learn so much from these half-hour programs from Bill, and he's been doing it for some years, and he does an outstanding job. I highly recommend it. Many, many different topics. You'll see he really covers Abraham Lincoln and the Civil War, and Frederick Douglass and John Brown and William Lloyd Garrison. But he also goes back into antiquity to early Christianity, the beginning of the nation of Israel, right up until the present day. So I highly recommend all of these to our audience. I will provide the links, but Bill has put so much great work out there. People need to share it with others, let people know all the great work Bill has done and been doing. And I do want to let the audience know, Bill, that you will be joining us here in New Jersey. On April the 12th, you'll be speaking at the Faith and Freedom Coalition April or second quarter meeting. That's April the 12th, and that'll be held at the Elmer Grange in Pole Tavern, New Jersey. And then the following night, he'll be joining us for our April New Jersey Constitutional Republicans April meeting on the 13th at Stakeout's Home Plate in Pittsgrove Township. So we're going to be looking forward to having Bill. And I would highly encourage all of you out there, spread the word. Bill will be here. You're going to want to meet him, bring friends, family to hear Bill and the outstanding presentations he gives us, and all the great work that he has done. Now, Bill, we want to talk about, we're in the month of February. In a few days, it'll be February the 12th. And remarkably, Abraham Lincoln and Charles Darwin were born on the same day.
Yeah, it is quite a coincidence. And so in this article, I contrast the two. So Lincoln is best known for what? Freeing the slaves, Emancipation Proclamation. Matter of fact, he said in his Gettysburg Address, November 19th, 1863, 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Well, Darwin's best known for what? For his theory of evolution, in which he espouses that all men are not created, they evolved, and they are not equal. Some are more evolved than others. And he writes about this in his Origin of Species, and then in another book, Descent of Man. And it gives birth to the survival of the fittest. Matter of fact, Darwin's book influenced Karl Marx. And Karl Marx talked about it validating his dialectic conflict. And so when Karl Marx wrote to someone named LaSalle in 1861, he says, Darwin's book is very important and serves me as a basis in natural selection for the class struggle in history. And so Darwin's best known for the class struggle. Matter of fact, Karl Marx, is known for the class struggle. Karl Marx called it critical theory, where you break a country into classes, and then you categorize some as victims and others as oppressors, haves and have-nots, and then you pit them against each other to cause domestic crises. And when the crises gets bad enough, then everybody panics and wants someone to come along and restore order. And that's when the power is usurped by the government and a dictator takes over. And so this model has been used over and over again. So Karl Marx dedicated his book, Das Kapital, signed a personal copy of it to Charles Darwin. And he called himself a sincere admirer of Charles Darwin. So Darwin influenced Karl Marx and all the communists. Matter of fact, Darwin influenced Margaret Sanger, and she talked about human weeds in the human garden. I'll read some of her quotes. Darwin influenced Frederick Engels, Vladimir Lenin, Adolf Hitler, Joseph Stalin, Mao Zedong, Pol Pot, Ceausescu, Kim Sung, and others who had eugenic policies and their totalitarian regimes that happened to kill millions. And there's Robert Conquest, who wrote Reflections on a Ravaged Century, and then he wrote The Great Terror. He says, organized irreligion in the 20th century committed atrocities on a scale that the fiercest religious wars never approached. So they try to say, well, those religious wars killed lots of people. Well, what he's saying is that they don't begin to approach the irreligious wars, right, done by secularists and atheists. Robert Conquest again continues, the scientific racism of Nazi Germany. And so, yes, they called it racism against the Jews. The Aryan race claimed to be superior, Übermenschen, upper mankind, supermen, and the other races, including the Jews, they categorized as Untermenschen, under mankind. And so, contrary to Whoopi Goldberg, yes, this was racism and against the Jews. Anyway, he goes on, the scientific racism of Nazi Germany killed 40 million and attempted genocide against Europe's Jews. The scientific socialism of the communist countries killed 100 million and still counting people around the globe. The Soviet dissident Vladimir Bukovsky has noted that people in the West routinely invoke the Spanish Inquisition as an example of religious horror. They are right to do so, but the Inquisition, in the course of 3 centuries after legal proceedings of a sort, killed fewer people, probably around 3,000, than the Soviet Union killed in an average day. And so quite a difference there. Lenin said in Socialism and Religion in 1905, Lenin wrote, our propaganda necessarily includes the propaganda of atheism. What shall now probably have to follow the advice of Engels once gave to the German socialists to translate and widely disseminate the literature of the 18th century French enlightened atheists. So
Mhm.
now, so we just to go back to the Lincoln-Darwin comparison. Lincoln is known for freeing the slaves, saying all men are created equal. Darwin is known that men are not created, they're not equal because some are more evolved, and it has been used to enslave and kill millions. So we got freeing the slaves and we got enslaving. We got all men are equal and all men are not equal. Now, another interesting thing, Lincoln, his last act in office was to approve that all national coins have the motto, "In God We Trust." And now Darwin's theory of evolution is best known for undermining the belief in God. That if you can explain everything as having evolved, that undermines the belief in God creating everything. And so in my post, I have some quotes from Lincoln where he talks about the importance of believing in God for the sake of equality. And he writes to the secretary of his cabinet named Salmon Portland Chase in 1862. He says, "The time for the enunciation of the emancipation policy can no longer be delayed. Public sentiment will sustain it. Many of my warmest friends and supporters demand it, and I have promised God I will do it." And people say, well, when did he promise God that he will do it? So Salmon Portland Chase explained. He said, Lincoln replied, "I made a solemn vow before God that if General Lee were driven back from Pennsylvania, I would crown the result by the Declaration of Freedom to the slaves." And so Lincoln's saying, because Lee was conquering and winning battle after battle, and he made a promise to God. Another quote from Lincoln, again, showing the importance of believing in God with the idea of all men being created equal. He writes, March 17th of 1865, "Whenever I hear anyone arguing for slavery, I feel a strong impulse to see it tried on him personally." And then Lincoln said, August 14th, 1862, "It is difficult to make a man miserable while he feels he is worthy of himself and claims kindred with the great God who made him." And then another great quote from Lincoln, April 6th, 1859. "This is a world of compensation, and he who would be no slave must consent to have no slave. Those who deny freedom to others deserve it not for themselves, and under a just God cannot long retain it." So again, these are important beliefs that Lincoln had that showed how he believed in God, and that was the basis for all men being equal.
Bill, can I just interject for a moment?
Yes.
There's been a theory within Christianity called theistic evolution. And basically it tries to marry the biblical record that we read in Genesis 1 of the creation of the world with evolution. And what this has done is, ultimately the question, Bill, is that either the Bible is true and the record is absolutely true, every single word, every single book of the Bible is true, or it's not. Now, if evolution is true, it contradicts the language of God saying that he would create the time givers, which were the timekeepers, which would be the sun and the moon, that he created the world in 6 days, or the universe rather in 6 days. And then with the light being created on the first day, and then the timekeepers being created, or excuse me, on the second day, and on the third day, the timekeepers, God goes out of his way, if you will, to say that evening and morning constituted that day. And we know right now, and this has continued on throughout time of the earth, is that we have an evening and a morning, and that constitutes a day. Some people have said, well, the day could mean a long period of time, where we also see in the Bible that is true. But in this specific case, The word that's translated, I believe it's yom in Hebrew for day, is over 2,000 times translated 24-hour day. So the argument of the theistic evolutionist is incorrect. God gave us specific information in Genesis, and we can clearly understand it. But the bottom line is Lincoln was a Bible reader. Lincoln believed the Bible. He read it profusely. If you don't believe it, read his second inaugural. But of course, Darwin started out a Christian, supposedly, and then devised this theory when he went to the island of Galapagos, I believe it was, and then he came up with his theory. But I just want to say, to conclude my remarks, is that if the argument between Lincoln and the contrast between Lincoln and Darwin is very, very important, because either the Bible keeps its veracity, it keeps its accuracy, or it doesn't. Because if God isn't being honest with us, as he gave these words to Moses on Mount Sinai, if God did not give the Genesis record accurately, then we could say what is accurate, what else isn't accurate in the Bible? We know that the Bible is absolutely infallible and veracious. It is honest and truthful because it is the very word of God himself. And Darwin's theory comes along and says, no, it's not that way. So that's the dichotomy that exists, and that's the decision that people need to make in trying to reconcile Darwin's views with God's word, the Bible.
Yeah, it is something that was the theistic evolution was something that was made in the late 1800s, early 1900s to try to accommodate what was Darwin's theory. There's some problems with that. For example, the secular scientists will acknowledge that the universe is 93 billion light years across. 93 billion light years. Yet they say that the universe is only 13 billion years old. It's like, okay, 93 billion, 13. There's another problem, and that is the Precambrian layer. When you have all the layers of sediment, the Precambrian layer is there's nothing, not even little bitty shells, right? All of a sudden, you go to this layer where there's thousands of different kind of life forms. It's like, okay, you went from nothing to something really fast. And then you see that there is variety within species. I mean, look at dogs. You can have little teeny dogs, great big dogs, but they don't turn into cats. They don't turn into cows. They don't turn into alligators. They're always dogs. And you know, you have
Bill, just let me say, because that reminds me that also in Genesis 1, we read where God created everything after its kind. There are no intermediary species. There's no intermediary species between an ape and a man, or any sort of animal like dogs or cats. They are specifically created after their kind. And that biblical truth that we read in Genesis 1 substantiates the scientific idea of biogenesis. So there's another within Genesis 1 an evidence of the veracity of the word of God.
Yes. Now, and there is the verse that says that first came sin, and then sin brought forth death. And so that scripture would have to be wrong if there was all this death before Adam and Eve sinned. But now Lincoln, he had the audacity to connect the sin of slavery with the judgment of the Civil War. Imagine that. If things are going bad in a country, saying, well, gee, maybe things are going bad because we're sinning and maybe killing innocent babies. But this is what Lincoln said in his second inaugural address, March 4th, 1865, just 41 days before his assassination. Lincoln said, if we shall suppose that American slavery is one of those offenses which, in the providence of God, he now wills to remove, and that he gives this terrible war as the woe due to those by whom the offenses came, shall we discern therein any departure from those divine attributes, which the believers in a living God always ascribe to him. Lincoln goes on, yet if God wills that it continue until all the war continue, until all the wealth piled by the bondsman's 250 years of unrequited toil shall be sunk, and until every drop of blood drawn by the lash shall be paid by another drawn by the sword, let it be, as it was said 3,000 years ago, so still it must be said, the judgments of the Lord are altogether true and righteous. And if you go to the Lincoln Memorial, Washington, D.C., and you're standing in front of that big statue of Lincoln sitting in the chair, if you look over to your right, you will see the entire second inaugural address, March 4th of 1865. But again, he had the audacity to connect the sin of slavery with the judgment of the war. And is there anyone today that has the voice to connect the sin of maybe killing 60 million unborn babies that have never done anything wrong, yet they're getting the death sentence with the judgments, the plagues? You know, Deuteronomy 28, blessings and cursings. If a nation hearkens to the voice of the Lord, they'll be above and not beneath, head and not the tail. But it says, if a nation does not hearken to the voice of the Lord, it says that there'll be a debtor. The stranger will come in amongst them and rise up above them. And then it says that they will have the diseases of Egypt come upon them. And so here, America is the most in-debt nation in world history. We got these different COVID diseases, and we have all kinds of debt. We're and struggles and facing problems. And so maybe
redefining marriage.
Yeah. So
redefining marriage, Bill.
Now, in his second annual message, December 1st, 1862, Lincoln said, in giving freedom to the slave, we assure freedom to the free. We shall nobly save or meanly lose the last best hope of earth. The way is plain, which if followed, the world will forever applaud and God must forever bless. So here's Lincoln, the first Republican president, and he is the one that is credited for freeing the slaves. Now let's look back at Darwin. In his Origin of Species, written in 1859, and his Descent of Man, written in 1871, he talks about some species being more advanced and evolved than others. So this is what Darwin wrote. With savages, the weak in body and mind are soon eliminated. We civilized men, on the other hand, build asylums for the imbecile, the maimed, and the sick. Thus, the weak members propagate their kind. No one who had attended to the breeding of domestic animals will doubt that this must be highly injurious to the race of man. Hardly anyone is so ignorant as to allow his worst animals to breed. So here he is saying that you should not build asylums for the mentally handicapped. You should not take care of the maimed and the sick. You should let them die. You shouldn't perpetuate them. In other words, get rid of charity. Just treat people like animals. And if they're not of the best species, just write them off and get rid of them. This is the cruelty that's hidden in Darwinism. Darwin continues. He said, civilized races of man will almost certainly exterminate and replace the savage races throughout the world. The break between man and his nearest allies will be wider, for it will intervene between man in a more civilized state, as we may hope, even than the Caucasian and some ape as low as a baboon, instead of as now between the Negro or Australian and the gorilla. That is racist. Charles Darwin was a racist. And it is amazing that science has not repudiated him. Now, this gave birth to something called social Darwinism, where it says that people that have become elites on the top of the pile, then that's because they're advanced, and the poor people on the bottom are not. And so this concept is ingrained in the Dred Scott decision. So Dred Scott was a slave, went with his master to Wisconsin, which was a free state, and comes back, and some friends say, well, you were in a free state. You could have just walked away from your master. And so they bring a lawsuit to free Dred Scott, and it makes its way up to the Supreme Court, and the Democrat appointed Supreme Court Justice named Roger Taney, appointed by the first Democrat president, Andrew Jackson. Roger Taney writes the decision. Okay, so this is the Democrat appointed Supreme Court justice. He says, slaves have been regarded as beings of an inferior order, so far inferior that they had no rights which the white man was bound to respect, that the Negro might justly and lawfully be reduced to slavery for his own benefit. Talk about racism by this Democrat appointed Roger Taney. I think they removed his statue from the US Capitol. Matter of fact, they removed lots of statues, and they were all Democrats. They were all Southern Democrats that were in favor of slavery. Now, Darwin influenced Margaret Sanger, and she came up with this idea of eugenics and forced sterilization. It's like forcing people to get vaccines, but this was forced sterilization. And Margaret Sanger started a 501c3 called the American Birth Control League, which changed its name to Planned Parenthood. And Planned Parenthood aborts 300,000 babies a year, totaling over 7 million since abortion was legalized in 1973. But then you have all the different abortion agencies coming up to about 60 million. And so Sanger had a Negro Project in 1939. And the purpose of it was to reduce the African American population. And she writes this. This is Margaret Sanger, founder of Planned Parenthood. The lower down the scale of human development we go, the less sexual control we find. It is said that the Aboriginal Australian, the lowest known species of the human family, just a step higher than the chimpanzee in brain development. Wow, that is extremely racist. Margaret Sanger wrote in her autobiography that she actually spoke to a Ku Klux Klan meeting in Silver Lake, New Jersey in 1938. And she said, birth control is not conception indiscriminately and thoughtlessly practiced. It means the release and cultivation of the better racial elements in our society and the gradual suppression and elimination and eventual extirpation of defective stocks, those human weeds which threaten the blooming of the finest flowers of American civilization. You can't read that any other way than Margaret Sanger, the founder of Planned Parenthood, was a racist. Margaret Sanger spoke on a radio interview on WFAB Syracuse, February 2nd, 1924. She said, just think for a moment the meaning of the word kindergarten, a garden for children. Every expert gardener knows that no plant would have a fair chance of life if it were overcrowded and choked by weeds. If plants and livestock are well, requires space and air, sunlight, children need them even more. A farmer who would produce 1,000 thoroughbreds would rather produce 1,000 thoroughbreds than 1,000,000 runts. And how are we to breed a race of human thoroughbreds unless we follow the same plan? We must make this country a garden of children instead of disorderly, a backlot overrun with human weeds. I just find it so just terrible that she would call any baby a human weed. And I'll just interject right here. The Bible gives the concept of spirit, mind, and body, that you are a spirit, you live inside of a body, and you possess a mind. And your mind is like a super fancy computer. It's more than that, but it's at least that. And your body's like the computer case, which makes it silly for people to argue over what color the computer case is. Imagine if I were to say blue computers are better than green computers. It's like, really doesn't matter what color the computer is. What matters is what software is running on it. Doesn't matter what color your iPhone is. It's what apps are on it, right? It doesn't matter what color somebody's skin is. It's what behavioral software is running on their brain. Is it the Judeo-Christian software where everyone is equal, made in the image of God? And this God says that there's no respect of persons in judgment. Everyone's to be treated the same. That this God says that whatever you do to the least of these, my brethren, you've done unto me. And that you're supposed to forgive if you want to be forgiven. That you should love your enemies, bless them that curse you, do good to them that hate you. That's a behavioral software. That's a teaching that we should put, but the other side has their software, their viruses, their corrupted files, their malware, their selfishness, that one race is better than another, and we're going to destroy and tear down and burn things and loot things and trash things. And so the battle is who gets to load the software on the next generation's brains. And critical race theory says that racism should be spread, that some races are better than other races, and you need to put one down and lift another one up, rather than saying, no, everyone is made in the image of God. So that's the battle. The battle is over school boards. The battle, everybody drives by schools every day. And if you go to a church member and you say, are you in favor of what they're teaching in there? You know, transgendered drag queen story hour, most church members will say no. And so the thought is, but you drive by that every day. And do you know that that school board member got elected with fewer votes than there are people in your church? If you just got your church and a couple other churches in the neighborhood to agree on a candidate, you could vote out all the school board members overnight. And if we can get churches to take concern over their local school board races, then all the higher races will take care of themselves. The people that run say, hey, we won that. Well, hey, let's run for city council. Let's run for state rep. Let's run, right? And it'll happen if the first step is taking that the pastors get their church members to just go out and vote for agree on a candidate and vote for them, and say, look, we want good values taught to these kids, that everybody's equal, not all the critical race theory and transgendered and so forth.
Very true, Bill. We're going to be wrapping up here, but it's a great conversation, a great presentation. And I invite the people to look up February 12th on the American Minute, and you'll be able to get more information. Bill just went over a little bit of it, but it's so true, Bill, that it's truly remarkable the influence that Darwin has had in all of the social sciences. If you say that there is an alternative to the biblical record, if there's an alternative to God's word, then anything is possible. And that usually means the void is filled by sin. Our minds we're born sinners. We have our minds are sin skewed, and we come up with, as Darwin did, promoting this theory. And of course, we see it with politics. We saw it with the creation of the progressive movement. Woodrow Wilson said that the founding fathers looked to Isaac Newton and his ideas of checks and balances and gravity within the universe. And Wilson said, we look to Darwin, who understood that everything is evolving, that government should be a living organism. So it's truly remarkable, the dichotomy between Lincoln and Darwin. I'm glad that you have done a great presentation on that.
Well, I'll end with a quote from Ronald Reagan. He spoke in Hamburg, Germany, May 6, 1985. Ronald Reagan said, each of you is made in the most enduring, powerful image of Western civilization. We're made in the image of God, the image of God, the creator. And so I'll end with that thought, that Lincoln believed in a creator and that we're all created equal.
Well, it's a great quote to end on. And incidentally, it's the anniversary of Ronald Reagan's birthday today, too. So in February, we've certainly had some great American presidents and some great Republicans born in February. Bill, I know you'll come back to talk to us soon, but we're going to look forward to seeing you here in New Jersey on April the 12th and April 13th, and we'll be getting more information out on that. And I'll be providing the links to the information I introduced in the beginning of the program. But Bill, thank you so much. I will talk to you soon. And as Lincoln said, liberty to all. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, JR.
Take care, Bill. Always a pleasure.